Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
Hello and welcome to What the Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Tuesday, November 10th, 2020. Welcome to day 1391. Attorney General William Barr authorized federal prosecutors to investigate substantial allegations of voter fraud, if they exist, before the results of the election can be certified, despite no evidence of widespread fraud. In a reversal of long-standing Justice Department policy, Barr wrote that investigations, quote, may be conducted if there are clear and apparently credible allegations of irregularities that, if true, could potentially impact the outcome of a federal election in an individual state, end quote. In Barr's directive, he said he had already approved probes related to the 2020 election, quote, in specific instances, end quote, but he did not elaborate on the circumstances or whether they remained open. The Justice Department's top election crimes prosecutor resigned in protest in the wake of Barr's announcement. Richard Pilger told colleagues in an email that Barr's memorandum breaks with the Justice Department's policy on avoiding interference with elections, which has stood for 40 years. A Justice Department official confirmed that the department is looking into allegations of ineligible voters in Nevada and mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo ignored Biden's victory and claimed that there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right? We're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful.
Pompeo went on to say that we must make sure, quote, that any vote that was not lawful ought not to be counted. That dilutes your vote if it's done improperly. Gotta get that right. When we get it right, we'll get it right, end quote. The White House Budget Office also instructed federal agencies to proceed with plans for Trump's February budget. The Washington Post says the decision to proceed with Trump's budget for the 2022 fiscal year has, quote, rankled and surprised several career staffers given Biden's victory, as well as the fact that the incoming Biden administration is expected to submit its budget plan to Congress early next year, end quote. The White House budget proposal is typically issued in February, which would be at least 2 weeks after Trump leaves office. Meanwhile, the White House is continuing to vet political appointees for Trump's non-existent second term. The White House Presidential Personnel Office is in the process of vetting candidates for job openings in the federal government, and the White House intends to fill them early next year. Meanwhile, the Biden-Harris transition team is considering legal action if the Trump administration does not formalize Biden's win and give him access to agencies and transition funding. The General Services Administration is tasked with ascertaining the results of the presidential election, but GSA Administrator Emily Murphy, a Trump appointee, has refused to sign off on the paperwork to begin the transition. Biden called Trump's refusal to concede the election an embarrassment that will, quote, not help his legacy, end quote. Moving on, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization for a monoclonal antibody therapy to treat mild to moderate coronavirus infections in adults and children. The single antibody treatment is similar to the therapy given to Trump after he contracted the virus. Eli Lilly said that its treatment should be administered as soon as possible after a positive coronavirus test and within 10 days of developing symptoms. Meanwhile, attorneys say they can't find the parents for 666 migrant children who were separated from their families by the Trump administration. That number is higher than the 545 children previously reported. And finally, Trump removed the official in charge of the program that produces the federal government's scientific report on climate change. Michael Cooperberg, a climate scientist who had been executive director of the U.S. Global Change Research Program since July 2015, had been expected to stay on through the production of the 5th edition of the congressionally mandated National Climate Assessment. Cooperberg's removal comes days after the White House tapped Betsy Weatherhead to lead the climate study. And in the polls, The Guardian says 70% of Republicans do not believe the election was free and fair, despite no evidence of fraud. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.